Chickpeas actually has a PhD in English. So if you want to hear him talk as eloquently as he did up there, go ahead and go watch Bring It Home. That's Thursdays on FreightWaves TV. We drop a new episode about every 2 weeks. My personal favorite is actually one that we did at the very beginning of the show with Boom Arrow, who, if you guys don't know, they're looking to bring back supersonic flight for consumers. So go give it a watch. You can find it on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our Bring It Home newsletter, which you can get in your inbox. Learn all about what's going on in the Right now, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next fireside chat. We've got John Shilley, Ryan Sharp, and Ben Peterson up here to talk a little bit about transportation management and how data integration brings it all together. Please give them a round of applause.
All right. Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. As mentioned, we're going to talk about data integration today as it relates to transportation management. Before we get started, we'll do some brief introductions. So I'm Ben Peterson, our head of shipper solutions here at SONAR. I actually joined SONAR at the beginning of this year, and prior to that, spent about 10 years on the shipper side, managing transportation procurement for both General Mills and Target. John?
Hi, everyone. I'm John Shilley. New destination to be announced shortly, but manage transportation groups at both Henkel and Unilever, also warehousing groups at Unilever as well.
Ryan Sharp, I'm the senior manager for logistics strategy at Nevada's Engineering. We build solar trackers for large solar farms, so in the renewable industry. So,
awesome. Thanks both of you for being here with us. So I'm going to start with kind of a broad question as it relates to data integration. It's been a priority for shippers for a while, but continues to grow. And so when you think about bringing external and internal data together, what's driving those priorities? Is it the need for cost savings? Is it the need to do more with essentially less, so maybe a leaner staff? And then essentially, how does that better connect data affect the speed in which you can make decisions? John, if you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I would say it's a combination of everything, right? I know that we looked a lot at the transportation market with Spencer's presentation, but I would say from a CPG perspective, the cycle's been very interesting. The strategies that companies have actually taken during COVID, it was service at all costs. Then cost to serve, right? And with some of the phases that you've seen, you had a tremendous amount of volume growth followed by pricing growth. Now it's how do we do things that are more efficient with what we have. So brands have been divested, right? Volumes dropped from a lot of CPGs. So I think now it's really focusing on how do we become more efficient as CPG companies?
Great. Ryan?
yeah, I think it boils down to, I think everybody in this room probably has on their LinkedIn or resume data-driven, and I think it's really just a matter of, okay, so prove it, right? Prove that you're data-driven. How do you bring that optimization to your company, and do you understand not only the macro trends in shipping and in freight, but do you understand your own industry, and not even your own industry, narrow it down even further, do you understand your own company's trends? So I think combining all of those things leads to better optimization and cost efficiency.
Awesome. So diving a little deeper into that, can you give some examples where you've implemented data integration and really seen some wins, whether that's bid, RFP automation, bringing some external data into your routing guides to understand the health from a rejection standpoint, anything that you've done to kind of, personally integrate data to help drive some of the decisions you're making? Brian, if you want to start.
Yeah, so for the RFP process, kind of long-winded here, but I think from the onset, it's before you even deliver something to a customer, right? A lot of the times the first interaction a customer has with you is your supply chain, and you don't think about that until something is late. But even prior to that, how are you optimizing the data? So you, like I said before, you have to understand your own trends. So for my industry, when I'm putting data together, I understand against macro data, well, I don't always ship during peak season, right? The term peak season for something like consumer packaged goods isn't my peak season. So when I'm overlaying my data with macro data, I can then go to my demand planner or my sourcing manager and say, listen, if we can create a capacity throughput that's off-centered of what everybody else is doing, we can get that stuff in while rates are low, capacity might be inflated, but demand is low. So then we can jump on price optimization there. And then I can take something like the LMI, which is one of my favorite reports and data sets, and overlay that and say, okay, I understand that maybe downstream warehousing capacity is tight, prices are up, and going through the East Coast might not be the most optimal right now. Then I can take data from like intermodal and say, okay, well now I can see that intermodal rates are down, capacity might be existent. So now I can take my product off peak, out of season, through the West Coast, use intermodal as somewhat of a transient storage facility so I don't have to pay those holding costs for my inventory on the East Coast or buy a port in the upstream warehouse. So now I'm not only negotiating price, I'm negotiating timing and I'm negotiating mode. And then I can pass those costs to the customer, those cost savings to the customer. And I've integrated my manufacturing process, my demand planner, my sourcing manager, and sales. So I've encompassed the entire S&OP process by using these different data sets.
Awesome. And when we had chatted, you'd mentioned your team is fairly small, right? So
Yes.
that the integration of data allows you to make decisions quicker and support with a smaller team. And I think you had mentioned a stat around implementing SONAR and what that had done from a cost saving standpoint with the data that was made available for your team.
Yeah. I mean, when we implemented it, and I know that might be a next question. How did I get this across? It was a pretty easy sell. I have a lot of trust and confidence from the VP on this, but I also just made it a personal, like I will see return on investment on the first project. And so I used the data, I went out and I was able to negotiate down, I won't give the figure, but it was very substantial. We saw a return on investment in the first project that we did when I implemented SONAR.
Awesome. John?
Yeah, I would say, for those of us that manage transportation and transportation groups, right? Very similar to other functions in supply chain, exception-based actions, right? So I think, when you look at some things that, I've been able to implement in my career, it's how do you give your team the power to find the exceptions quickly, right? No one necessarily in this industry wants to hear when things are going well. It's, when do we have the disruption, right? How do we quantify that, right? So things like integrating for kites to really help with that, combining other data management tools outside of a big system, right? And I think as we talk about maybe some wish lists later, that probably getting a little bit ahead of myself, but using a lot of the data that we already have to create some exception-based tools that the team can action.
And when we chatted before, you had mentioned carrier scorecard
Correct.
as an example. Is that something that you have rolled out in some
Yes.
of your previous roles?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is I know that we all invest in TMSs and WMSs, which is fantastic, but the reporting and data aggregation is something that has to be done sometimes outside the systems. The nice thing about integrating data with carriers and using your own systems is you get to the single point of truth with the data, right? So I've been able to establish base scorecards, sending raw data to carrier providers, because one of the insights that I've had is in each company that I've been a part of, that strategic transportation providers have more people working on my freight that more than that are on my own team, right? So being able to provide that drill down data in addition to a scorecard, I think goes a very long way to really getting to the root of issues and making corrections.
Perfect. So one common thing that usually occurs as you talk about data integration is that usually competes for both time, expense, and IT resources internally. So a common roadblock that you have is you need to prove whether the cost savings or the time savings internally. Can you give some examples or some conversations that you've had internally to help prove why data integration would matter and then how you got that buy-in from leadership?
Yeah. I'm sorry, sorry. But yeah, so I would say that anytime that you do roll out an IT project, to your point, there's the IT resources, the time doing current activities. So I think, where we've been successful is a couple things. I would say that mature CPG companies are also offshoring, outsourcing some of processes overseas, whether they're in current companies or contracting a 4PL to help with that. So I would say that some of the business cases have actually revolved around headcount of not going to use other manual resources outside of market as one. I think that's where a lot of the cost savings are actually going to be when you actually talk about the tool usage. But if there's other things that you can do to lump into business cases, how the technology would make better decisions, reducing accessorial costs, so on and so forth, all of that should be lumped into your overall business case.
Yeah, I think, in logistics, it's finding the cross section between effectiveness and efficiency. And sometimes some people are more effective than they are efficient. I got everything to the job site, but we blew the budget. We had to go through the West Coast. We had to truck it across the city. We didn't budget for that, right? We were effective, but we were not efficient. And some people like to think they're super efficient. Like, look, I saved on budget. We came on under budget by 26%, but we were late on every single delivery. So we're not being effective. So what is the cross section? And like anything in life, it's a compromise at some point, right? There's going to be a compromise. So when you can take something and to senior leadership and show them, look, here's the cost effectiveness, here's the efficiency with what we're doing, and this is why we should implement it. I think that's where you win, because everybody comes from different, I'm a logistician, supply chain person in a renewable industry, right? Not many people in that industry look at supply chain as the most important thing. But when I can start speaking their language, maybe the CEO talks efficiency a lot. Maybe the COO talks effectiveness a lot. So now I'm combining all aspects of that and able to say, this is why we should use our time and resources for data integration, because there might be a cost up front. There might be a slowdown up front, as with any implementation, but over time, you can see return on investment, not just in time, but in money as well.
And as you work through the data integration, you got to compete for resources, but also you kind of have to work through change management, right? So as you roll out these new processes, you have to work through what the automation does and kind of training and making sure that, everybody understands the new processes. How have you seen success with, rolling out those integrations and making sure that everyone's up to speed and the value that they're delivering? Brian, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think the training part is the biggest thing. It's that first hurdle of, is everybody bought in, number one, right? And I think that's the pitch, is how do you get everybody bought in on something? How do you, after you've been doing something for 3 years and everybody seems to be super efficient at what they're currently doing, to tell them we're implementing a new process and having to say, yes, over the next 3 months, you're going to be less efficient in what you do, but I promise you it will pay off in the back end. Well, again, that might be easier to sell on a PowerPoint graph to senior leadership, but the people who are sitting behind the keyboards and doing the key punching, how do you sell it to them as well? And I think that just getting everybody on board and having a clear message to the company of why this is going to be important in the future is the first thing that you need to do before implementing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, right? I think not only do you need to get senior leader buy-in, but you have to get that right level of understanding with the people that are going to be operating the technology, right? And I think for me, everybody talks about what is going to be different, but also need to really get at the operator level explicitly what is going to be different for you. And I think where projects that are rolled out have a high degree of success is a lot of post-go live support. from IT and other professionals, daily check-ins, right, to make sure that the technology is working as expected. Because I think with every technology project that's actually rolled out, is you do find things that don't go as planned, things that work differently than you would think. And really making sure that you've got the right level of resources post-implementation is really going to drive these projects to success.
Great. So we've talked through some examples. Can you talk a little bit about how you practically built those connections, whether it was an API, was it flat files, was it custom builds, and then some learnings you had along the way? John, you had mentioned, again, the carrier scorecarding. How did you work, whether it was internally or with your carrier partners, to understand what data should be on those scorecards and what was going to provide the most value for both parties?
Yeah, so I think everybody's got their own way of measuring on-time delivery, right? So obviously it was going to be a metric that was more internal created, because there's a lot of transportation metrics that are actually cascaded up through organizations. So ensuring that that's understood. On-time pickup is pretty self-explanatory, and then contract compliance. I think those are the three. For me, the big thing is speed of data and being able to roll it out to providers quick, so that everybody's on the same page. So it really wasn't anything that was overly complex, right? But getting somebody that was actually able to code macros to bring the data from the TMS, export high-level metrics to carrier providers on a weekly basis, in addition to the raw data, right? Because in some instances, maybe the data is incorrect and you need to have a discussion about it, right? So for me, that was a quick thing to do. Getting somebody that had the right level of programming and being able to export files to carrier providers in a timely manner, I think was the biggest win that we had.
Great. Ryan, any examples?
Yeah, I think so. There's the physical, not to get like too philosophical here, but there's the physical integration of it, but there's also the data mindset, like integrating it into your decision matrix, right? And I think that for us was the biggest thing, was integrating data into how we make decisions. So I can put data inside of our BOM tool and say, here's our lane pricing for over the last 7 days. So if you go to quote, here's this degree of volatility, just share that with the customer. That's one way to do it. But then it's also, if we're using a brokerage, I can utilize data, which I just recently did with SONAR data, to say, look, I understand that, pricing may be increasing out of this lane, capacities tightening, but like you're asking for X percent, 26% over what we agreed on. What I'm seeing data-wise is 13%. And that's going to elicit phone calls immediately from people, because they're going to say, where are you pulling this data from? So I think it's not only just the physical aspect of it, the API, the integration into your systems, but it's also into like the decision matrix, which we're all risk analyzers in supply chain, and we're all decision makers. And I think that is the key part, is how are we assessing risk? How are we making decisions? And are we using data to inform those decisions? I think that's the key word too, is inform, not completely drive, right? It's not just completely automated. You still have to make the decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So we've talked about kind of some past examples. So where do you see future going? So obviously a lot of conversations around AI and what that can do as you talk about integrating data and bringing external and internal data together. John, you mentioned a wish list. What does that look like? What do you think AI will do as it relates to data integration?
Yeah, so maybe taking a little deviation from the AI bit, but the interesting thing about the transportation industry, everything's like connected. Everything's a microcosm of other things, right? A lot of the data that you do have is very, very internal focused, right? I think at least from a rate perspective, there's some great external sources. The tender rejection chart that tells you a lot about how things are going from a compliance perspective. So that's something that I think what I would find very interesting managing logistics areas is, how does my service look in the context of the market, right? So just a personal example, I think anybody that distributed food or personal care items during the pandemic can tell you how fun that was. Getting beat up, when your on-time delivery numbers look horrific, but the idea of benchmarking and using other data sources to contextualize what was actually going on for me was very helpful. Internally, I was, you're not at 93% to Walmart, but Walmart also had some data, right, where they benchmark similar companies. I'm like, well, Walmart thinks I'm doing a great job, right? I'm number one at Walmart, number two consistently week on week for large scale CPG companies. So again, you always want to look for improvements, but I think sometimes contextualizing what service actually looks like in good markets and when the markets are doing what they did to probably a lesser degree during COVID, I think is always impactful. And that's what I would like to see as data evolves, is what is good.
Yeah, I think the AI thing, it's obviously become a buzzword in almost every business meeting. How do we use it? Are we using it right? And I think, we could go down a rabbit hole of, is AI being utilized correctly? I mean, I think if you ask a lot of people in college, like they understand it more than anybody. How can it be used? But I think that that is the next step in utilizing data, right? Even something as that I've considered, like, how could we potentially build a platform where a customer could go basically in the evening and say, if we're on different coasts or whatever, and say, how sure are you that my package is going to be there on time? Instead of asking me that question, maybe they use a language model, and that language model pulls in a bunch of different data and says, well, the degree of volatility is this, on time has been this lane looks like, this, there's a snowstorm coming in. And so they're able to kind of do some predictive analysis on that. So I think that maybe is just scratching the surface of it. We have a systems guy that works at our company, and he is way more intelligent on this stuff than I am. But we talk about ideas all the time about how we can integrate data and utilize AI. And it's not taking anybody's job, it's enhancing somebody's job so it can relieve some things off of them so they can go do other things, right? Somebody has to build it. You have to teach a language model, right? So how do we do that? What data are we using to teach it what we want it to maybe interface with our customers?
Awesome. Great examples. I believe we're at time right now. So just want to say thank you both. I think that's some great conversations around data integration in today's supply chain and for future state. So thank you.
Thank you.